Ka tangi te titi, ka tangi te kaka, ka tangi hoki ahau. Mai e te whai, au, ki te ao marama tihei mauri ora. Ka mihi ki te whare e tūnei, tina koe. Ka rere ngā mihi ki ngā mate kua whetūrangitia. Haere, haere, haere atu rā. Ko tēnei te mihi ki te hunga ora, tina koutou. Ki ngā mana whenua o konei kia kaitahu whānui, tēnei te mihi, tēnei te mihi. Ki ngā manuhiri, tina koutou. Ki oku hoa mai mahi, ki a tātou tauira o tākou whakaihuaka, tina koutou. E ka rangatira, ahorangi Neil Pickering, tina koe. E tō whānau, nau mai, haere mai. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Well, good evening. I'm Jessica Palmer, and I am one of the Deputy Vice-Chancellors here at Ōtākau Whakaihuaka, and it is my pleasure to extend, on behalf of the Vice-Chancellor, who unfortunately tonight is in the United Kingdom, his sincere congratulations to you, Neil, and I get to stand in this particular role, and it's a real honour to do so. It's my great pleasure to congratulate you on your achievements, and with this group here to mark this night as one that honours you. I want to also welcome a few special guests. So a very warm welcome to Fiona. Where's Fiona? So Fiona, Neil's wife, it's lovely to have you here, and your children Benji and Gemma. And Benji, Dad's not quite sure how old you are, so it'll work on that afterwards. And to Fiona's mum, Stella, thank you, and sister Lorna, it's lovely to have you both here. And also Fiona's dad, Don, who would have been here if he could have. Online we have Neil's two PhD supervisors. So to Martin Evans and David Grieve, it's lovely to have you with us online. Thank you for joining. I know too that we're probably also joined by several of Neil's Australian friends and colleagues. So lovely to have you zooming in. And I think probably not right now, but later on, we may have some of Neil's family from the UK watching this after the event. And so we say a warm welcome to all of them as well, and thank them for their support of Neil. So, there are 4 initials that can drive fear, ambition, or just plain bewilderment into academics here at Otago. They are S-O, Professor Hanton, what are the other 2? L and C. He knows them very well, having sat on many committees. S-O, L and C, sustained outstanding leadership and competence. These are the promotion criteria to get to professor at this university, and they are demanding. The criteria state that the university will look for leadership, exceptional ability and original thought in pursuit of research, that with respect to teaching, you must show exceptional ability to inspire high academic endeavour and original thought, and service that amounts to a sustained contribution of great significance and distinction. And Neil satisfied what is an exceptionally high bar. The process requires satisfying many people sitting across many different committees, as well as international referees. And so Neil, bravo and well done. It's a significant achievement, and it signals our professors as leaders in their disciplinary field, as leaders with their students, and as leaders within the wider university community. In days gone by, the inaugural professorial lecture would in fact have been a part of the test itself, and you would have to deliver as evidence that you could justify your promotion. Thankfully, that is not what this is anymore, although I'm sure you would have passed it. Instead, tonight, we take the time just to simply pause and gather and mark your significant achievement, Neil, to hear about you, your journey, your work, to learn a bit more about your ideas and your research, and so we look forward to doing that. We like also to take every opportunity to get dressed up into regalia, so a few of us have done that, which is also a sign of our respect to you, Neil. And I want to just introduce you to members of the party, as we call it, who are with me tonight to celebrate. So you will hear shortly from Professor Suetonia Green, who is the Dean of the Dunedin School of Medicine, and she will provide an introduction to Neil. You'll hear then from Neil. After that, you will hear from Professor Lynley Anderson, who has been a colleague of Neil's for a very, very long time. and I'm told is also a very close family friend. And then also we will hear from Professor Megan Gibbons, who is the Pro-Vice-Chancellor of the Health Sciences Division. And finally, I want to say talofa. It's lovely, Diane, to have you with us here as the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Pacific. So, several of us here tonight to congratulate you and to enjoy this moment with you. So, can I ask you to put your hands together in this pre-acknowledgement of Neil's achievements while Swaitonia comes up. Thank you.
So I'm Swaitonia, and I am the Dean of the now newly named Faculty of Medicine, Dunedin, and it's my great privilege this evening to provide a 5-minute introduction to Professor Pickering, so I'll try and keep to time. And so the reason that I'm here is because Neil is a professor in the Department of Bioethics at the Faculty of Medicine, Dunedin Te Pō Kapu Matatika Koiora. And it is New Zealand's only Department of Bioethics, so it's a huge taonga in our country, and Neil is one of the newest professors of that department. We have the privilege and the joy this evening to hear Neil's life work to date, which is a really special occasion to hear your story and how you have been inspired to create knowledge and understanding. And also, looking at the number of students you've supervised, you've created space for others to do the same. Before I begin too much further, I just want to remind us what bioethics actually is. So to quote the Johns Hopkins Berman Institute of Bioethics, it's the study and the response to moral and ethical questions arising from biology, healthcare, and technology. I've known Neil in my role for about 11 months, and what I know so far is that you are a talented percussionist or drummer. You have a deeply wonderful, dry sense of humour, which can come out at the funniest of times, which I really enjoy. And you've got the capacity to see the good things in people. My favourite thing about you so far is the line in your application for research and study leave. So this is an opportunity for people to take time out of the daily life of academics. And you described that your research and study leave was an opportunity for you to read deeply. It wasn't to travel the world and take those collaborations across the seas. It was to sit and read and deeply understand your work, and to give you precious time away from the usual pressures of academic life. Our faculty is incredibly unfortunate to have people like Neil. And I love the bioethicists in our faculty because they often bring the moral and analytical courage to our conversations. They basically say, "Why is that? What do you mean?" Which I really love. Neil started his journey by being captured by the issues raised in medical ethics just at the time when centres for bioethics were beginning to develop and do research and teaching, including at Swansea University, Wales, where you completed your master's and your doctorate, focusing on the concepts of mental illness, and I'm sure we'll hear more about that this evening, which led to a book called The Metaphor of Mental Illness. You then met, or at the time you met, Professor Don Evans, who set up the centre in Swansea, and then later came to direct the centre at Ōtākau Whakaihu Waka. And we're grateful that Don encouraged you to join him. Your mum was a librarian, and your dad was a teacher. And in your usual self-deprecating way, you described yourself to me as not being able to say you were a stellar student, but arriving at Exeter University, discovered what it is to become immersed in a subject and that subject was English literature and the journey that we're on. You describe being influenced most by Keith Salter at the time, who was a lecturer who used the John Keats phrase, truth is beauty, beauty is truth. That is all ye know on earth and all ye need to know. You describe deep inspiration from your supervisors, mentors and friends, Martin Evans and David Greaves, who welcome online. Once you arrived in Dunedin in the late 90s, you met Professor Lindley Anderson, who's sitting beside you, and you've worked together for 26 years, and describing Lindley as the life and the soul of the centre. And when you provided the feedback on Lindley's recent inaugural professorial lecture, it was very clear how long and meaningful your collegial relationship has been. When I asked Neil what the highlight of his career is so far, he nonchalantly said to me, having a career. And it just reminded me that having a career is actually a privilege. And it's a privilege that you haven't forgotten in your life. You then described your service for 9 years in the National Ethics Advisory Committee, which is our national body that really leads ethics in health research and teaching, and particularly leading the 2019 National Ethical Standards for Health and Disability Research and Quality Improvement. So thank you for that work. You describe the value of your work life as being deeply personal. You spent several years after being at Exeter in around 1980, unemployed and in factory jobs. I noted when I saw that it was at the same time that my own father, who had finished his qualifications in the UK, was also unable to find meaningful employment. And that led him to migrate with me at the age of 5 to Otago, something that I won't forget. Neil describes humbly that this was a time when he didn't know who he was, and has now discovered that work is a deep source of meaning. He discovered this when working in bookshops in the 1980s and then for the Quakers. And it was then when he started working in academia, and particularly here at Ōtaku Whakaihu Waka, that he really felt comfortable in his own skin. Neil, it's such a privilege to be here, and I'm really looking forward to your inaugural professorial lecture, deeply examining the very basis of how we describe and think about health conditions and disease. Tēnā koe.
Kia ora, Sway, kia ora, Jessica. So one thing I learned from that is I'm old enough to be Sway's father. No, I learned a lot more. Okay, kia ora koutou, ko Neil Pickering aho. He ke mahi aho, kei te pokapū, matatiki koe ora. Kei te koa tina ko, ki te korero, ki a koutou i tēnei rā. So hello everyone, my name's Neil. I work at the Bioethics Centre. I think we may have to get a new Māori name now. We're the Department of Bioethics. And it's a great privilege and pleasure for me to be with you all and to have so many of you come here to support me this evening. And also to all those who are currently online, hi. And to those who are watching the recording, hi. You're going to miss out on the tea and biscuits that we're going to have later. But it's great that you've been able to catch up with this eventually. Okay. So This lecture has 3 parts. So the first part is, just as Sway was saying, it's a bit of background, a bit of backstory. And then there's a sort of bit in the middle where I'll say something about some of the research I've done. And then there's a bit at the end where I'll do some outrageous speculation, which I think we're probably allowed to do in these things. If I run out of time, you won't get the outrageous speculation. Oh, I'll try to make sure we don't run out of time. Okay. So the lecture's entitled Getting Clear About Concepts, and I hope what will become clear is why that is the title as we go along. So one thing you might wonder, I certainly wondered, is how do you make these things interesting for people? It does depend what you mean by interesting. And that question, it depends what you mean by, is actually a kind of basic question for me. Now, we have at least one philosopher in the room, maybe more, but I'm looking at Heather. And Heather will know that what do you mean by sounds like a linguistic question. But I suppose there's a difficulty in the relationship between words and concepts, which I don't think I've ever managed to get to the bottom of. But when I say, what do you mean by something, I'm really thinking of how you're conceptualizing, what the concepts are that you are using rather than the words, although I acknowledge that there are connections between them. Well, let's go right back to the beginning of the story, to where I started. That's a quotation from Philip Larkin, by the way, who is a constant companion, as it were. This is the nuclear family, the nuclear Pickering family at 25 Turmaldale, Welwyn Garden City, which is where, I wasn't born there, but that's where I lived. And that's where my parents lived pretty much their whole married life. So that's me trying my teeth out in the front row. And that's my brother Clive on the right, who will eventually, I hope, be able to hear this. And then there's Mum, Stu and Dad in the back row. Now, when you kind of leave it as late as I have to be prophesized, is that the verb? It's very sad that some people who I'm sure would love to have been here or seen this day, sadly have passed away. And that's true of my mum and Stu and of my dad. They all died in the last 5 or 6 years in COVID times, but not of COVID as it happens. But what I want to say about them is that what they instilled in me was the idea that education matters for itself. I don't think they ever talked to me about what I would do with the education or that I needed to get qualifications in order to get a better job, though I'm not saying that's not true. But that was never really their message. That really wasn't their values. And so they instilled in me the idea that intellectual endeavour is its own reward and its own value. Now, this is actually Exeter University, a photograph taken in the 1970s when I was there. Yeah, no, I can't actually see myself. But I mention Exeter because it was there that I had my first brush with concepts. I remember my one of my teachers, Keith Salter, who was mentioned by Sway, setting an essay. And the essay title was, "Is Dr. Faustus a Failure?" or possibly Dr. Faustus is a failure, discuss. By the way, this is not a medical thing. This is not a Dr. Faustus, who you might think is a GP or something. This is Christopher Marlowe's Dr. Faustus. This is the play that contains the words, "Is this the face that launched 1,000 ships and burned the topless towers of Ilium? Sweet Helen, make me immortal with a kiss." You may wonder how that could possibly be a failure when it's got lines like that, what T.S. Eliot called Marlowe's torrential imagination. But I realised that I was not going to be able to answer this question unless I made some effort to define what a failure was. And that's really where, if I go back, if I recreate my backstory, where an interesting concept first started. Now, as Sway said, after Exeter, I didn't really have the faintest idea what to do with myself, and I was absolutely astonished to find on the internet this picture of the shredded wheat factory in Welwyn Garden City. Now, shredded wheat is not a thing here in New Zealand, but it's a breakfast cereal. And I worked there on the night shift at one time. And that was where I worked. I mean, it's a derelict building in this picture and has since been completely demolished. But I can actually remember the shredded wheat used to come down those things and come past us, and we had to put it in boxes or something or other. So I'm not sure I exactly chose that as my career, and nor did I choose my next option, which was a career of unemployment. And extraordinarily, this is the very unemployment office where I used to go and pick up my weekly dole. No, it isn't. I just made that up. But they all look the same, so I suppose it might. So unemployment didn't entirely suit me, or Sway's dad, who decided 20 years before I got round to it to come to New Zealand and try their luck there. So the next thing was I had to go at bookshops. Actually, my brother Stuart saw an advert in the Welwyn Times, which was our local newspaper, for a job in that bookshop. It's the last two doors on the right-hand side. This is Holywell Hill in St Albans, and the cathedral is just round to the right, St Albans Cathedral, which has bits of Roman stone in it. It's been there a long time. And I actually worked in that bookshop for 4.5 years. And it was, as Sway said, I began to get a feel, perhaps, for what I wanted to do. I really enjoyed working in bookshops. You get a nice class of customer. Well, for a start, they're all there to buy books, which is except for the ones who were there to nick the books in order to do other things. But yeah, I really enjoyed working there, and I also worked in a bookshop in London subsequently. But while I was in London, I came across the Quakers. I never joined the Quakers, but nonetheless I did a lot of work for them, and this is where I worked in London. That's the University College Church there, for anybody who has ever been to any of the University of London. It has no foundations. And that was because the people who built it believed that in any moment they would be lifted up into heaven along with the church. So they didn't see any point in having foundations. So it has no foundations. Anyway, I lived and worked in that building. It's the Quaker International Centre for many years. And it was there, in fact, that I made a very important acquaintance, and that is Martin, who you will hear a little more about in a minute. While I was working for the Quakers, I actually spent some time in China for them. This is Chengdu, which is in southwest China, on the road to Tibet. And that's that is a statue of Chairman Mao, which used to stand at the end of the main street, like a giant traffic policeman. And this is a fairly old picture, I think, but that's exactly how I remember it. Mostly bikes, not many cars. I think it's completely changed these days. Apparently Chairman Mao statues are back in China these days, so I imagine that one's still there. That was an extraordinary experience working in China for 11 months, I have to say. Okay, now, while I was working for the Quakers, I ran into this chap who's in the middle of this picture. That is Professor Martin Evans. That's a selfie, but in the days, you know, when you had to set your own camera up on a tripod and everything. And the important thing about Martin, I'm going to create now a origin myth. It's not entirely true, but there are facets of truth about it. I think it's useful to have an origin myth. Anyway, the myth is this, that one day, Martin, who was already looking at a career in medical ethics, gave me an article written by the chap on the left. The chap on the left is Bill Fulford, who is the sort of grandfather, if you like, of the ethics of the philosophy of psychiatry, which is really my area. He'd written a chapter about his ideas about mental illness. Now, I'm going to slightly move away from the truth here. He wasn't doing this, but one of the things that Bill did was to tangle with the guy on the right. And this is Thomas Szasz, who, he's an interesting guy. He's like Cacophonix in the Asterix books. You remember there's the Cacophonix, who's the bard and the singer. There's a description of him as, what does it say? Opinion is divided as to his talents. He thinks he's great, everybody else thinks he's awful. And Thomas Szasz, although I don't know that he thinks he's great, is one of these people who is way out there, and he simply denies that there's anything called mental illness. He simply denies it. And Bill and a whole bunch of other people were quite determined to prove that he was wrong. Now, when Martin showed me this article, I had a kind of dual reaction. First of all, I got it. I knew what was going on in the article. I knew it was a conceptual argument that was going on. I perhaps couldn't have given it that name, but that was one element of the reaction. The other element was I could respond to it. I could go toe-to-toe, if you like, with the issue that Bill was discussing with Szasz, as it were. And this, I can tell you, was a pretty heady moment. Not quite as heady as that time I drank 4 pints of rough scrumpy on an empty stomach. That really was a heady moment, but it was still intellectually a very heady moment. And this is why it's an origin myth. I realized at that point what I was there to do. It may have taken a few years before I got round to actually doing it, but this sort of triumvirate, plus David Greaves, who was my other supervisor, and I met a little bit later on, they're all there making things happen for me, enabling me to find out what I was supposed to be doing. Meanwhile, at the same time, as Sway said, this subject, at that time called medical ethics, but nowadays we call it bioethics, was beginning to flourish. This was around about 1988. And the centre here in Otago, the University of Otago, was set up in 1988. You remember that, Linda? Not quite, she wasn't quite there. Not for a few years. Set up in 1988, one of the earliest people was Grant Gillette, who was only recently retired. And these centres were being set up, in fact, pretty much all over the world in the late 80s. Here, Swansea, and in many other places. And the reason I mention that, and the reason why I mentioned Swansea specifically, is because these are the two places that Professor Donald Evans worked in, no relation of Martin. And I have to say that without Don, I would simply not be here doing what I'm doing today. He was the director of the centre in Swansea. He'd set it up. And in the background, he kind of believed in me and encouraged me. And later on, when he came out here in around about 1997, a couple of years later, he encouraged me to come out and join a group that he was getting together. And that group actually included Linley and another colleague of mine, Jing Bao Nie, who may also be online. If you are, hi. Ni hao. That's Chinese for hello. Okay, so unknown to me, this subject was developing, and the thing I just got interested in and that subject come together. Now, you may remember that I was talking about a disagreement about whether mental illness actually exists. And you may wonder, and I didn't even think about it at the time, but you may wonder whether that matters. Does it really matter whether there are mental illnesses? Well, these are a couple of examples of why it does matter, or might do. So the guy on the left, that is Daniel McNaughton. Daniel McNaughton murdered Edward Drummond in the belief that he was shooting the Prime Minister, Robert Peel, in 1843. And what would have happened to him if it hadn't been for the fact that he was found insane and to have a disease of the mind, would that he would have gone to the gallows. As a matter of fact, he didn't. The insanity defence was accepted in his case, and later on the McNaughton rules, which we still have here in New Zealand, complete with the archaic term disease of the mind, because they can't think of anything better. Everything else, it's the worst possible except for all the others. We still have that set of rules for insanity. On the right are some illustrations from Struwwelpeter, which is a book originally written in German by Heinrich Hoffmann, who it turns out was a psychiatrist, actually, and he wrote the book because the children's books that were available one Christmas didn't look very good, so he wrote and illustrated his own. Now, this particular child is Fidgety Philip, or in German, Zappel Philip. And this has often been held up as an example of ADHD. Something, I can't remember, what does ADHD stand for? Yeah, that's right, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. I should know that because I've written a lot about it. But I'm feeling a bit hyperactive right at the moment. So this, what would have happened to a child? This was written in 1845, so not long ago. What would have happened to a child in the late 19th century who displayed these kind of behaviours? Well, Fidgety Philip in Struwwelpeter gets away with it pretty well, but there are other children who suck their thumbs who have them chopped off. the attitude towards childhood behaviours and illness was very different in those days. Once, a bit later on, there was an interest in whether in fact these reflected something which the children had no control over, then the whole picture changes very much. And instead of punishing, because in those days it would have been punishment, and of course severe physical punishment in many cases, was replaced instead by a sense that these children needed help. Now I know that there is also a sense today amongst psychiatrists, and I was at the Royal Australian New Zealand College of Psychiatrists conference last week, in which there's a fear that the ADHD diagnosis has gone too far, and that and also underlying that there's a fear of social control, that psychiatrists are actually not just trying to help people anymore, but they're trying to kind of shape them, stop them doing stuff we don't like. And that is a constant fear of psychiatry, and that, of course, is what drove Thomas Zaz. Okay, so I think concepts do matter, and in particular it matters whether we can have a meaningful concept, as it were, of mental illness. Now I'm going to flip through this pretty quickly, but what I noticed was, when you look at the dispute between, say, Bill Fulford on one hand, who thinks mental illness is a real thing, and Thomas Zaz on the other hand, who thinks it isn't, is that they agree about how to reach the conclusion. They just can't agree about how to use the method. But they certainly agree about the method. So here we have a kind of illustration of Zaz. Now Zaz says if anything is a disease or an illness, it had better have an anatomical pathology. And then he looks at the candidate diseases, the candidate mental diseases, for example, such as schizophrenia and ADHD, and declares there's no anatomical pathology here, and so they're not diseases. Bill Fulford, and everybody else on mental illness, as I said earlier on the other hand, has a completely different idea of what the concept of mental illness should look like. So he has this idea of action failure. It's not an easy idea to spell out, but I get the general gist of it. And then also there's a harmful dysfunction and a biostatistical abnormality. These are all accounts. And on these accounts, schizophrenia and ADHD turn out to be diseases after all. So it's the same method. We start off with a kind of essence of disease, and then we look to see whether the mental illnesses have it or not. I mean, to summarize, as you can see, but it looks as though it depends on your concepts, rather than what you might think it might depend on with what it's like in the real world. Now, at this point, I hear you say, there's one concept which we don't appear to have said anything about just yet, so we remove the one doll and we find another one inside, and that's the concept of a concept. After all, concept that, and this is how philosophy goes, isn't it? Yeah, I'm sure Heather will know this. You're digging away at a certain thing on the surface, and then you find there's another question to be asked lurking underneath. So really, most of my time has been spent trying to get clear about concepts, not in the sense of the substantive concepts, but in the very idea of concepts itself. So I'm not going to say much about this because it's pretty esoteric, to be absolutely frank with you. But I should mention reasonably quietly, I think, here in Otago, the family resemblance theory of concepts, which was developed by Wittgenstein who's not necessarily the most popular philosopher around here. But it's an interesting thought that I think he puts forward, which is that maybe concepts don't just have one thing or even a small group of things that kind of make them very clear what's in and what's out, but instead maybe they're a kind of family of ideas. And his chosen example is games. And I'm just actually repeating some of the things he says there. By the way, theft and shrubbery. Does anybody here watch Would I Lie to You? So, do watch the episode where Bob Mortimer introduces the world to the game of theft and shrubbery. It's well worth a watch. Okay, so even before we start to wonder whether Thomas Zaz or Bill Fulford or Christopher Bourse or Jerome Wakefield, these are all people who've come up with concepts of illness, before they're right, are they right to think that there must be a clear definition for concepts? Or maybe they're more like a family. Well, this is a good chance for me to mention my family. And there they are in various guises. So I'm not quite a constant in that, so I am in most of them. By the way, I had a short military career. Didn't I, Peter? Yes, very short, and not very military either. The thing about, I mean, these are pictures of, that's the UK family, top left, with my mum and dad and the children's, my children's cousins, Tasha and Nia. And then there's the Otago, New Zealand family, as it were, which is this group here. And then there are various permutations of them. And this group on the left, lower left, they're the latest additions to the family, because that's my niece Tasha's wedding. And she's just married that rather handsome-looking chap called Sam, who's next to her. And, okay, well, I can't resist using this to illustrate the fact that the way things come to be grouped together, there are so many different ways. I mean, a family, sometimes it's because you look the same, although there are plenty of people who look the same but aren't in the same family. But then there are conventional relationships as well, like marriage, for example. And there are genetic relationships, but two people who get married don't, generally speaking, have genetic relationships, or not very close ones anyway. And there's one person in the picture whose face I've blanked out because I haven't got permission to use the picture, but she used to join us every year for Christmas. And she began to become part of the family as well, although she's neither genetically nor in any other conventional way related to us. What this makes me think is that family resemblance has a bit of a problem. Where on earth does the family stop? I mean, essentialism, you know exactly where you stand. But if you're just going to extend it almost forever, and there are all these different kinds of relationships, you're going to find eventually that everything falls under one concept. And that is a real problem. Well, if you're worried about concepts, that's a real problem. Okay, there are other ways of looking at it. I tried to come up with a solution to this problem. I'm not going to go in it, and the solution is to buy my book. Yeah. So I'm going to finish off, and I've just slightly run over time. I'm going to finish off with some outrageous speculation. I think that the world around us, both the human world and the natural world, the social world, is so complicated and so interrelated. In fact, I think it's probably more than complicated. I think it's complex. Those staircases are complicated, but it's a bit complex when they keep moving as well. So complicated or complex that you can use your imagination to conceptualize things, particularly at the intersection between the human, the natural, and the mental, and the social, which is really where we all, each of us, stand. And you can come up with a theory about, say, mental illness, which is at this intersection. And I think there's a pretty good chance that there's something in the world that will support your theory. Having said that, I don't think it will support just any theory. I think you can try it out and see if it works, and I think probably that's what psychiatrists and natural scientists in general are doing with the world, and sometimes the world will support you and sometimes it won't. So I'm not taking an idealistic position, although I do think that scientists are highly imaginative people. Okay, I'm now going to be even more outrageously speculative for a second. I noticed some of people from the music department here. And I have begun to wonder whether some concepts are there not to try to describe the world, but to resist changes in the world, for example. And the one that I'm considering just at the moment is the notion of creativity. Working with a couple of Peter and Anthony's colleagues. Now, before you ask why Strawberry Fields is there, one thing most people don't realise, but they will realise it as soon as they think about it, is that to create a product like Strawberry Fields takes an enormous number of people. It's not just John Lennon and his guitar, although that's where it started. You've got the other three Beatles, you've got the production people, you've got George Martin, who wrote the brass and cello parts for it. You've got Jeff Emerick, who is the technical person, and who put it all together. And without all those people, there's no Strawberry Fields forever. Interestingly enough, Strawberry Fields, they recorded about 120 versions of it. And John Lennon quite liked number 7 and number 50 or something like that. And the trouble was that they were in different keys and going at different speeds. So one of the people who turned that stuff into what we have today was Jeff Emerick, who speeded one up and slowed the other down until they were in the same key and going at the same speed. You can hear the break if you listen carefully. Why do I mention this? Well, just suppose you could do all that at the touch of a button. In fact, you could ask AI to write your songs for you. And there is a big discussion in the music world at the moment about whether AI would create truly creative songs. And that's kind of what I'm looking at in my spare time. But my feeling is that if you take the view that it can't, a priori, in other words, from a conceptual perspective, you're probably trying to resist what you perceive is happening, that non-human things are coming along and taking over the human world. So you are pushing back on behalf of humanity, which is where I'm going to stop. Thank you so much for your attendance. Ngā mihi nui, haere rā, in a minute when it's time to go. It isn't just yet. Thank you so much. Kia ora.
Koutou katoa. Ko Lindley Anderson tōku ingoa. Thank you very much, Neil. That was terrific. It is a great pleasure to be asked to thank Neil this evening. And I'm taking on two roles here. I'm speaking on behalf of our current head of department, Mike King, who's off on parental leave, and he passes on his apologies that he can't be here, and also his best wishes to Neil. And I'm also speaking as Neil's long-term colleague and friend. It is down on the run sheet that I'm meant to be talking about in response to Neil's talk, but I'm deviating from that completely. So there are so many things I want to mention about Neil, but I have limited time, so I've had to be quite selective. So Neil has been a part of the Bioethics Centre since 1999, and that's, as Suetoni has said, is when he and I started working together. And his work has left a deep imprint, not only here at Otago, but also on the wider world of bioethics. And I know I speak for Mike as Neil's current head of department, and myself as one of the previous heads of department. Neil has been the deputy head of department for both of us, and he's done that job for many, many years. And Mike and I both agree that he is a wonderful sounding board, ready with wise advice and counsel. When thinking across his career, Neil has been able to combine rigorous philosophy with a deep sense of practical challenges of healthcare. His publications are widely read and discussed. He's had a number of service roles across his career, including the Health Research Council Ethics Committee and, as Suetoni has said, the National Ethics Advisory Committee. And it's that last role that's had the biggest impact. It was Neil who led the committee, as Suetoni has said, that rewrote the national standards for ethics committees across the country. Now that is a phenomenally large task. Every researcher has guidance in place for their actions, thanks in no small part to Neil and his committee. And every research participant up and down the country, and there are thousands, have protections in place thanks to the work of Neil and his committee. And this is a real legacy and something he should be especially proud of. But I want to also turn my attention to two particular aspects of Neil's work and of working with Neil. And the first of these is with regards to his teaching within and for the Bioethics Centre. Now, Neil was put to work immediately on getting here and had a role in teaching. And he's been central to ethics education in medicine at Otago. He created and led the ethics vertical module in the medical curriculum for at least 8 years, a major achievement in integrating ethics into the clinical training for doctors. He has a significant role in developing and strengthening our postgraduate courses and teaching across many of them. That includes creating new postgraduate courses, including in research ethics, and he has served as academic lead for bioethics for many years. Through these roles, Professor Pickering's teaching has shaped generations of students. Now, Neil has a particular way of capturing the audience and making the topic engaging for students, and I think you can all agree with me about that. For example, Neil and I share the very first official lecture for incoming medical students. That means 350 students in one room. And that's probably one of the biggest lecture theatres in the university. And Neil's role is to talk to the students about the values that make up a good medical student. So he wants to tease that out of them. Now Neil strides back and forth in front of the students, asking the students to consider some of the values that a medical student might need. And here he invokes Harry Potter, getting the students to think about Hermione Granger and making a contrast between the values that she embodies against those of Neville Longbottom. And if you know your Harry Potter, you'll know what I mean. The students love it. Neil's teaching techniques are a lesson in how to work with students. Now remember, these students are young. These are new entry medical students, so they are probably 1 year out of leaving school. They may offer something in front of the class that's perhaps not well thought through, and in other ways maybe less than ideal. Now Neil takes it all in his stride, and like Professor Dumbledore, if we're going to use Harry Potter references, he responds kindly but firmly, and he brings a really generous manner to his teaching. It is like he is guiding the students along a pathway, but most of them are probably not even aware that he is guiding them in this process. I've also co-taught with Neil in postgraduate papers. In these classes, Neil can make a slide or a point last a very long time. Now that might sound like a criticism, but it is definitely not. He turns each point over. He looks at it from all sides. He helps the students look at it from all sides. By doing so, he is teaching and modelling analysis skills to the students by sympathetically and critically engaging with the point that he is turning over. It is a wonderful skill, and I've watched the students respond incredibly well to this approach to teaching. As usual, he brings his own form of generosity to those students as well. But what is Neil like as a colleague and as a friend? I carried out a highly scientific poll this morning around the department, asking my colleagues to describe Neil in a few words, and here they are. Curious, dogged, willing to go after philosophical problems most people would not notice, a font of knowledge, insightful, great in a quiz team, quirky, funny, very funny, hilarious, a dry wit, witty, king of the dad joke, humble, a wonderful sounding board. He's somebody who wants others to succeed, kind, genuinely compassionate to staff and students, generous with his time, and supportive. As you will have noticed, there are two common words used to describe Neil, and they are fun and generous. Neil's sense of humour may at times make us groan, especially when it comes to dad jokes, but his humour also makes the Bioethics Centre an incredibly happy and positive place to work. The other word, of course, is generous. Neil is a deeply generous colleague, offering his time and insight whenever it is needed for the benefit of the department and of our staff and of our students. If you are lucky enough to have gained Neil's support, that support is unwavering and meaningful. So it is with great pleasure this evening that we celebrate not only Professor Neil Pickering's personal academic achievement, but also his contribution to the flourishing of bioethics here at Otago and beyond. So thank you very much, Neil. And I'd like you to come up, because I've got a gift for you. Well, it's not mine. I didn't buy it. You university has a gift for Neil to say thank you so much and congratulations on your wonderful achievement. And here it is here.
Yeah.
Thank you.